today. Andy is in Knoxville. His niece, I think, is graduating from high school this afternoon. Got your Bibles, Genesis chapter 37. We're going to read the first 8 verses. Genesis chapter 37, beginning with verse number 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the son of Bilhah and the son of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, that's Jacob. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in old age. He made him a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that his father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Now in this message, we're going to refer to the entire life of Joseph. Now if I were to put a title or subtitle on this message today, it would be, "You're one step closer to what God's about to do." You're one step closer to what God's about to do in your life. This 17-year-old boy discovered that regardless of what happened to him in his life, he was one step closer to what God had in store for him. Also, if you looked in the bulletin, you saw the title of today's message is 6 Degrees of Separation. Does that ring a bell to some of you? It's actually a title of a movie. It's a 1994 movie. Will Smith starred in that movie. And the movie was based on a real university research. There was a Harvard professor. He just had a hunch, or he just had a guess, that no one person in this country is far away from knowing another person in this country. He didn't have any way to prove that until he came up with an experiment. And basically what he's saying is, you know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. That's simple. Now, what he did, he went to Omaha, Nebraska. He randomly chose a number of people. And then he asked this randomly selected people in Omaha, Nebraska, "Do you know anybody in Boston, Massachusetts?" They said, "We don't know anybody." He said, "Okay, I want you to think of somebody that may know somebody that lives in Boston." They said, "Well, I think I know somebody that may know somebody." And so through all of that process, he concluded that we're only 6 people away from knowing everybody in the United States. In other words, if we pick somebody randomly here and say, "Okay, I'm going to pick a random person in California," you probably never heard of them, don't know who they are, you're only 6 people away from knowing that individual. Now, let me take it a step further. How many of you on Facebook? All right, with Facebook today, they say we're only 4 people away from knowing everybody. Now, let me give you a story. How many of you know who Justin Timberlake is? Does anybody know Justin Timberlake? I don't know Justin Timberlake. I'm only one person away from knowing him. I had classes with his granddaddy in 1980. Charles and Bobby Timberlake. But also, I'll tell you something else that may blow your mind that you may not know. Also, I'm one step in that direction, but also, there's a little lady, I can't remember her name, but it's Miss Bobby's sister, worked at Dollar General in McKinney. I found out through Miss Bobby that that was her sister, so one day I went and I said, "So you are Justin Timberlake's great aunt." You know what she did? Shh. Please. Do not tell anybody. Little girls will be lined up at my door and a long line aggravate me to death. Please do not tell anybody. It's our secret. So one step away from knowing him in two different directions. Now, I think Mr. Worth McCain taught Miss Bobby and her sister in school, Miss Ann. I think it's what you told me one time. I can't remember the last name. But I'm just one step away from knowing Justin Timberlake. Let's take that step further. I'm one step away from knowing President Obama. You might say, well, Philip Fincher's been in our church. He's a congressman. He's been in the White House, so President Obama knows him. So I'm just one step away from knowing President Obama. President Obama knows the Queen of England. So I'm just two steps. So she's watching this morning. Hi, Queen. I doubt she is. In the story, we're going to discover that Joseph was only 6 degrees away from God's destiny for him. Now, I know we got English teachers here. We got BJ and we got Missy here at church, and I will have to make a confession. When I was in high school, I thank God for Cliff Notes. I don't know if Cliff Notes exists today because they'll have to because of the internet. But I'm going to give you a 1-minute version, Cliff Note versions of Joseph's life. First of all, Joseph is the youngest of his father's children, or he's the youngest of Jacob's children. But also, he was the son of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. And also, we know that Joseph goes to his brothers who are keeping sheep, and they're not doing a good job of sheep keeping. So Joseph snitches on them, and they want to kill him, but yet they decide to throw him in a pit rather than kill him. Well, they make some money off of it, and they sell Joseph to some Arab slave traders who takes him to Egypt. Now, he's one step closer to what God has in store for him. We know that there's a man named Potiphar. Potiphar buys him and puts him in his house, and everything Potiphar has is blessed. His stocks and bonds and everything just go up. Everything in his house is just a whole lot better. And he goes back and says, it's been better since this man Joseph came into my house. And so Joseph is 1 degree closer to what God has in store for him. Then we know Miss Piper starts chasing Joseph around the house. Somebody said she's probably one of the original cast members of the Desperate Housewives. But she starts chasing him around, and she says, lie with me. And then Joseph said the right thing. He says, I will not sin against God. He does the right thing, but it comes out the wrong way. He gets thrown into jail. But he's still one step closer to what God has in store for him. We know that we don't know why this happened, but the butler and baker of Pharaoh, they also get thrown into jail. We don't know why they got thrown into jail. The Bible doesn't tell us, but while they were in jail, they had a dream, and Joseph interprets a dream, and Joseph is 1 degree closer to what God has in store. Joseph tells the butler, he says, you're going to get out of jail in 3 days, but Mr. Baker, I hate to tell you, I've got bad news for you. In 3 days, you're going to be headless. You're going to die. So when the butler was leaving, Joseph, this is kind of a loose translation, Joseph says, take my business card. And when you get to Pharaoh, I want you to remember me. Don't forget about me. Well, the butler says, I'll remember you, Joseph. Well, he's 1 step closer to what God has in store for him. And then finally, one day Joseph finds himself standing right in front of Pharaoh. In a moment, he was at his destiny. Today, when your faith is in God, when you have strong, abiding faith in God, you're 1 step closer to your destiny, regardless of what happens to you. If you trust in God, if your faith is in God, He will move you 1 step closer to where He wants you to be. Now this morning, there's 3 things I want to say, very simple, kind of right out of the story here. Number 1, you're 1 degree closer to what God has in store for you, regardless of how you got in the mess that you're in. There's a lot of folks that are in a mess. You know, there's a lot of folks who've never been to college, but they have a PhD. It's a PhD in messology. They know how to mess up things. And so there are a lot of folks out here, you may be in a mess this morning, and you don't know how you got that mess, but you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're in a mess. Let's go back to the year 2000. You remember the story of the Millennium Bridge in London that's built over the Thames River? It opened on January 1st, 2000. As it opened, they let thousands of people go out on the bridge. It was a pedestrian bridge. It's not for cars, no, it's a pedestrian bridge over the Thames River. So let all these thousands of people on opening day get out there on the bridge. But when they got out there, what happened was the bridge began to wobble. It began to wobble. In fact, it wobbled so wildly that the people on the bridge thought, this bridge is going to break and we're going to fall into the Thames River. So they got all the folks off. And so the next day they decided they would send 25 people out on the bridge to see what would happen with just 25 people on the bridge rather than thousands of people. So they sent 25 people out on the bridge, and sure enough, the bridge began to wobble. Well, they couldn't figure it out. Did the people cause the bridge to wobble, or did the bridge just wobble? Well, you know, it took them a year to figure it out. Well, you know, life is kind of like that. Sometimes our life just wobbles. We're not sure why things in our life wobble. But the truth is, sometimes we do things to ourselves that cause our life to wobble. But then other times our life wobbles. Why? Because of things that other people do to us. Now, when you look at this story here, you're going to find there's some things that Joseph did to himself, but there's some things that were done to Joseph that he didn't have anything to do with whatsoever. Let's think about that for a minute. He didn't get a choice who his father was going to be. You didn't get a choice who your father was going to be. You don't have a choice over that. So his father was Jacob. Let's just think about Jacob. Let's think about Joseph's father. When you read the scriptures, it's almost like he's always involved in some kind of scam. Matter of fact, the name Jacob means trickster. So he's like, he's always running from a posse, but he's just one step ahead of the posse that's chasing him. Now, Joseph did not get a vote that he was who his father was. He didn't get a vote that Jacob was his father. But let's just think about Joseph's father for just a few minutes. Let's think about Jacob. Jacob had an unusual family situation. He worked for Laban, and he worked because he loved Rachel. But then on his wedding night, he thought that he was marrying Rachel. He raises up the veil, and it's not Rachel, it's her sister Leah. And so Jacob said, no, wait a minute. This is not right. I wanted Rachel. And so they had to work another 7 years to get Rachel. But then our text in verse number 2, it says that the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wife. So let me give you the picture. This is the household that Joseph grew up in. I know no other way to put it except just put it this way. Joseph grew up in a household where Jacob had 12 children with 4 wives living in one tent. Think about it. That's the household Joseph grew up in. 12 children by 4 different wives in one tent. So what I'm trying to say to you in a nice way, Joseph grew up in a very dysfunctional family. There's no other way to put it. It was a very dysfunctional family. It was a challenging situation that Joseph grew in. He had no choice over the matter. That was the hand that was given to him in life. Also, Jacob had not learned anything about his own life. Jacob's life had basically been destroyed because his mother, Rebekah, played favorites between him and his twin brother Esau. But then what happens? Jacob turns around and does the exact same thing in his own family. He repeats history. He has a favorite, and it's Joseph. Joseph is the youngest son, and it's his favorite. So this is some of the stuff that was done to Joseph. But also also, as we look at this, on the other hand, there's some things that Joseph did to himself that caused his life to wobble. First of all, he was a snitch. Now, remember back I had Miss May Eby, she's deceased now, but I had her for the first grade, I had her for the second grade, I had her for the third grade. I had one teacher for the first 3 years of my educational experience. I remember Miss May Eby had a picture on the wall, and today, people would come up in arms today in education if somebody's had this on the wall, but she had the picture of this ugliest looking man and woman on the wall, and it was Mr. and Mrs. Cowtail. And if you snitched on somebody on the playground, she would come up and say, "That's what you look like right there." Today, every teacher would probably be fired if they did that. But Joseph was a snitch. Joseph went home and told his dad, he said, my brothers are not, I don't like the way they're tending sheep, how they're keeping sheep. And so, his brothers hated him because he was a snitch. But also then Joseph had something that came from God. God gave him some dreams. There's nothing wrong with those dreams coming from God. But he told his brothers those dreams. He said, one day I'm going to rule over you. Well, you know, when you're 17 and your brothers are 25 and to 30, you tell them one day I'm going to be the boss over you. You can understand why they did not like Joseph. It's okay to have dreams from God, but sometimes you need to keep those dreams to yourself. And so he told his brothers these dreams, and they were not ready for those dreams. So at 17 years old, Joseph is in a pit. His life is wobbling. Joseph could not figure out what was done to him, and he could not figure out what he had done to himself. Now, can I be honest? There might be some folks in this room this morning that's in a pit. You don't know how you got in such a mess that you're in your life. You don't know if you did it to yourself or somebody else done it to you, but you know this morning that your life is in a mess. You know that your life is just wobbling. You know that it's not what it's supposed to be. But here's the good news. The good news is called grace. You don't have to figure out how you got where you are. Grace means that God can take you from where you are right now and move you 1 degree closer to where He wants you to be. That's the first thing. Number two, sometimes you can do the right thing and it comes out wrong. Sometimes you got to do all the right things, but it's going to come out wrong. But God will still put you 1 degree closer to where He wants you to be. When you look at Joseph's life is a story of ups and downs. You know, it's just ups and downs. He's either up or down. I mean, it's not just a straight line in his life, but it's up and down, up and down. It kind of reminds me, do y'all remember Mr. Bozo? Mr. Bozo was about 4 feet tall, 6 inches, 4 feet, 6 inches tall. Matter of fact, you can go to Toys R Us today and find Mr. Bozo. The thing about Mr. Bozo is this. Mr. Bozo, you can hit him as hard as you want. And you know what happens? Mr. Bozo goes down. But you know what happens? Mr. Bozo comes back up. So you can take a baseball bat, you can hit Mr. Bozo, he's going down, but he's going to bounce right back up. Now, let's just say you take Mr. Bozo, and you do some forensic surgery on Mr. Bozo. It would be a deflating experience for him, but if you get back to Mr. Bozo, you're going to discover there's something inside of Mr. Bozo that you know about. You see, when you walk with God, regardless of your circumstances that you may find yourself in, you have something in you that other people don't know about. This is what happens. You bounce back up. You may get knocked down, but you bounce back up. Now here's Joseph. He's working for Mr. Potiphar. Mr. Potiphar's name is really Mr. Slaughter. Can you imagine who you work for? I work for Mr. Slaughter, so you can guess why I got that name, Mr. Slaughter. But Joseph goes from the pit to working for Mr. Slaughter. Now Joseph in the house, everything gets better in Potiphar's house. The hand of God is on Joseph, so everything gets better. Potiphar never had so many good things happen to him. So what does he do? He says, you know, this man Joseph come to my house, everything's better. So I tell you what I'm going to do. he calls in Joseph and he says, Joseph, here's the keys to my vault. Joseph, here's the numbers to all my bank accounts. Joseph, here's all the stocks and bonds I have. Joseph, you have access to everything I have, except Mrs. Potiphar. And then we know what happens. Mrs. Potiphar chases Joseph around the house, and Joseph did what any man of God needs to do in that situation. He just looked and he said, no way, no way. But you see, Joseph did the right thing, but it comes out wrong. She grabs his coat, and in the trial she says, okay, exhibit number A is Joseph's coat. Somebody here this morning might say, that's my story. I've always tried to do the right thing, but when I do the right thing, it always comes out wrong sometimes. I've given my life to God. I follow Him. I walk carefully. I try to support God's church. I've done all the right things, but somehow things in my life comes out wrong. This morning, let me encourage you. Just like Joseph under God, you're 1 degree closer to the next thing God has for you. Now, if you're going to look at Joseph's life, if you just want to, you heard her playing country music records backwards. Let's just say, let's play Joseph's life backwards for just a few minutes. Let's trace him from being the CEO all the way back to the pit. When you look at that story in Joseph's life, Joseph had to make every single stop. Every single stop was necessary in the journey for him to get to be CEO at Pharaoh's house. You don't want to look at my own life. There's been ups, there's been downs. Sometimes my life's just been level with the ground. But I would not be where I'm at today if it had not been for every single stop along the journey. Y'all may not remember his name, but you may remember his story. His name was Robert Sloan. He was running a marathon here in England. At mile 20, he got really tired. He was winded and he was just wore out. And so he jumped out of the race and hid behind a tree. He saw a bus come by, he got on the bus, he rode 4 miles down the road, he jumped off the bus, hid behind another tree, jumped in the race, and came in third and got the bronze medal. But you only made 3 big mistakes. The first one, he got on the bus that was full of people watching the marathon. The second mistake was, no one had ever run the last half of the race quicker than they did the first half of the race. But then he made a third mistake. There's a guy that had been in third place all day long. And he said, nobody passed him. And so that was a daily thing. And so he had to be stripped of his medal because he thought he could skip 4 miles. From the life of Joseph, it took every step along the way. It took all the wobbling. It took him being sold in the pit, or landing in the pit, being sold to a gypsy caravan. It took Potiphar and Mrs. Potiphar. It took all of it for God to get him 1 degree closer to where he wanted him to be. Someone here today, you may be in a pit. You're discouraged. You don't know what to do. You feel imprisoned in your circumstances. But I want you to remember this morning, you're 1 degree closer, or 1 step closer, to what God has in store for you. Number 3, you're 1 degree closer because God's putting people in your future that you don't even know is there yet. God's putting people right now that's going to be in your future that you don't even know about. Here's Joseph. He's in jail. You see, when God's hand is on your life, never underestimate what God can do in your life. The whole situation, now Joseph lands in jail, the whole situation is better in jail now. Everything in jail is better. The prisoners are just nicer, they're kinder, everything's just flowing so good in jail. And they think, things just got better since Joseph got here. So what does the jailer do? He calls Joseph in, he says, Joseph, you're going to be the chief jailer now. And so by the timing of God, Pharaoh throws a butler and the baker in jail. Now, we don't know why they're in jail so a while ago, but they're there just at the right time. People that Joseph did not expect to be in his life. You see, God has a lot of ways to get you to where you need to be. Now remember, they had a dream. The butler and baker had a dream. And God has put these two people into Joseph's life. Now, we know that one of these people, the butler, 2 years later changed everything in Joseph's life. Just in a split second. You see, sometimes God puts people in your life that's out there in the future. There's a guy named Mike Webster. I was talking about marathons a while ago. Mike Webster ran the Boston Marathon in 1983. I worked with Mike. Mike had bought box seat tickets to the New York Rangers, New York Yankees, Texas Rangers baseball game. His parents came in. They were going to go to the game. He decided not to go. He gave me the tickets. And because of Mike Webster giving me those tickets, that's how Trish and I got together. You see, God is putting people out there in your future to get you one step closer to where God wants you to be. You may not even realize those people in your future are there now in your future, but they're there because they're getting you one step closer to where God wants you to be. Now, back when I was in school, I never got in trouble, but I came close a few times. Chess was real big. You know what I'm saying? We had the chess boards, and a lot of times, you know, somebody tapped on the back and looked back and make a move right quick, and they just be innocent, you know. This is what they say. A beginning chess player can only think 3 moves ahead. But a grandmaster, when he sees you make that first move, he is looking at least 30-something moves ahead, all the way to checkmate. Now, if a grandmaster in chess can see that many moves ahead, don't you think that God can see that many more moves ahead in our life? He can see that much further in our future. Now notice, here's the butler. He sends for Joseph. Joseph now is standing in front of the most powerful man in the whole world. Now, sometimes God does things slowly. Sometimes God does things quickly. You know, in the Christmas story, it says, suddenly there was a multitude, or there was, with the angels, a multitude of heavenly hosts. Notice it says suddenly. Pentecost came out suddenly. Sometimes God does things suddenly. Now here's Joseph. He finds himself running a national food program. In an instance, Joseph has reached his destination that God has in store for him, but notice how he does it, one step at a time. Now let's just rewind his life just for a second. I want us to look down that pit this morning where Joseph said, I want us to see what we see in that pit. Well, obviously we see Joseph in that pit. But can I be honest with you? There's a lot more in that pit than what we see. What was in that pit with Joseph? Well, there's a whole lot more in that pit than Joseph thought. In that pit was the Exodus. One of the world's greatest events in history. Had he not been in that pit, had he not gone to Egypt, there would have been no Exodus. What else was in that pit? Passover was in that pit. The parting of the Red Sea was in that pit. The Ten Commandments was in that pit. The manna that came down from heaven, that fell from heaven, was in that pit. Some of you may be in a pit today, but there's a whole lot more in that pit than you can imagine. You see, God's moving is 1 degree at a time. Have you ever noticed, too, when you're in a pit, you always get a lot of advice? An optimist will walk by that pit and say, you know, that's the best pit I've ever seen. Pessimists will walk by that pit and say, nobody gets out of the pit like you're in it. Well, I'm thankful that someone came whose name was Jesus. He didn't just look down in that pit, but he got down in that pit and he lifted me up out of that pit.
Amen.
Now, as we look at the life of Jesus and the life of Joseph, there's a lot of similarities. They both came from unusual family situations. Joseph in one tent with 4 different women and 11 different siblings. Jesus, what an unusual family situation. Mary was his physical mother. The Holy Spirit was his father. Both of them had to go to Egypt as part of God's will. Remember when Herod was killing all those babies?